What did the Master mean when he said, "These things which ye pray for, when ye pray, know that ye receive them and ye shall have them"? From the start of the message of the infinite way, I have explained that we are to pray only for spiritual grace, for spiritual wisdom, spiritual understanding, spiritual light, spiritual activity, spiritual supply, spiritual companionship. Not interpreting them in some human way. I'm talking sincerely about praying spiritually. Now, the revelation which came to me in the years in which the subject of prayer and meditation was unfolding was to the effect that we as human beings are shut off from this spiritual light and spiritual grace. That's why we have sin, disease, death, war, lack, and limitation. Therefore, when we pray, we're not really praying to God. We are merely praying somewhere within ourselves that the barrier, whatever its name or nature, may be dispelled or removed that is keeping us from receiving the Word of God in our ear, or divine guidance, direction, and so forth. Since God is Spirit, all that God is expressing is spiritual activity, spiritual law, spiritual supply. Therefore, all that we can become aware of is some activity of the Spirit or of a spiritual nature. Now, this has been my work and teaching for 30 years, in spite of the fact that there were still many who disagreed with me. But I am happy to tell you this, that one night on his broadcast, television broadcast, Bishop Sheehan, the Catholic bishop, closed his program by saying, and please remember, when you pray to God, do not pray for things because He has no things to give you. Pray only for spiritual things or spiritual light. And then last month I received an article sent out by the Episcopalian bishop of the Diocese of Texas, a paper which is sent out evidently weekly or monthly to Episcopalians in Texas, and he starts it off by saying, "Are you still one of those who pray to God for things and expect things from God?" Joel Goldsmith says, you should not do this, because you are that place that God shines through, and you should be willing to let God's grace flow through you to the world. And then he enlarged on it, and then he said, and Joel Goldsmith further says, and so he went on for this entire paper, showing that at least one member of the Catholic hierarchy has agreed with this light, and that at least one Episcopalian bishop has agreed with this light. But I'm happy to tell you that it is more widespread than that. The Protestant Church of all denominations has accepted the art of meditation and practicing the presence, and it is so permeating the church that now from all over the land I am receiving copies of sermons and remarks and statements on the air on the subject of prayer and how to pray aright by not going to God for things but for the things of the Spirit. A few months ago, another book was written by a man of the Episcopal Church, and it is now widely circulated in that church. And in the bibliography, he gives credit to the Infinite Way. He writes me a personal letter that he has been a student of the Infinite Way for 2 years, and on the subject of meditation, he recommends that the art of meditation be used as a textbook, and for spiritual healing, that the books of the Infinite Way teaching be used. Think of this, and I will have more to tell after the art of spiritual healing has been released as to its activity inside the church. So you see that what I am teaching on prayer is nothing new. It is absolute truth, and if you were to read the writings of the greatest mystics of the world, you would know that there was nothing original in it, that it was only by the grace of God that it was revealed to me as it was to these others, and because it has been revealed in modern times, in modern language, and probably by one who knows only 1 and 2 syllable words, it will now become clear to the entire world that we are entering a new era of religious worship, in which, first of all, we will gradually give up praying to God for things and will learn to love God for God's sake, not for the things that God can give us. Just like we inherently love our parents, not for the things they can give us, great as these may sometimes be, but merely for themselves. So ultimately, all of us must learn to love God, not for what God can give us, but for what God already has given us as the creative, maintaining and sustaining principle of this universe. And then when in our ignorance we have a lack, whether it's a physical, mental, moral, or financial lack, or companionship lack, or human relations lack, we will learn to pray to God, give me light. We will pray to God, speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. We will pray to God, thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. And be satisfied that the infinite wisdom that created all this and maintains it and sustains it, the divine love that is the all-being, will care for us without any conscious thought upon our part. So it is then that this, which has been a part of our work even before the Infinite Way textbook was written, is now becoming recognized as the true concept of prayer. And it will increase until all of the world knows the true nature of prayer and how to pray aright. Also, I must say to you at the same time that the principles of healing which constitute the healing message of the Infinite Way are also being accepted by other movements. And I can prophesy for you that the day is coming when these principles of the infinite way will be the accepted principles of spiritual healing in all organizations where spiritual healing takes place. The reason is this: the principles of the message of the infinite way are entirely different than have ever before been presented in any spiritual healing activity. They have no relationship at all to what is taught in Christian Science, in Unity, or in New Thought. And unless a person can empty themselves out of their previous teachings, they will not fully grasp these principles, which are so effective that they took me out of being just an unknown name among 11,000 other names as a practitioner, and has made this work known throughout the free world, the Protestant world, and has given it such wide acceptance in the United States, in Canada, in England, Holland, Germany, Switzerland, South Africa, parts of North Africa, India, Australia, New Zealand, all without any organization, without any promotion, without any advertising, without any activity of a human nature. Why? Because people have been healed, and their healings have testified to this work, and they have written friends and relatives, and so this activity has spread. So it is. One day you are going to witness that when there are periods of trouble in the world, that churches are going to advertise that they are open today to pray for our enemies. That for this one day of the week, we will not pray for our friends or our allies or our relatives. We will devote this entire day to praying for our enemies, and probably wake up tomorrow and find that our enemies have become illumined. We will find the day when churches will be open for prayer, and the congregation will be instructed that you need not pray for anything, for your Father is the all-knowing mind, which already knows your need, and since it is His good pleasure to give you the kingdom, let our prayer be one of praise and gratitude and joy that we are those of the kingdom of God who know this truth. We are going to come, if not today, tomorrow, to those healing principles of the infinite way, which are unique to this message, and which you can embody if you can grasp their import. The next question is, why does pulling in the ears accompany my meditation, or a flow through the body, or any other physical manifestation? There is not one answer to that question. There are two answers. One is that if it is a true meditation, those physical experiences are entirely normal for a while, and eventually they will subside. But there may be physical reaction in the body to true meditation for many, many months, or just many, many weeks. The reason is that when true meditation has been accomplished and the Spirit really is flowing in consciousness, it begins a purification of the body. And pretty soon, all of the impurities of the body that may have been there and which are present in all humans dissolve and are eliminated. Let me explain that. No one ever becomes sick in a moment. Sickness is always something that is growing in a person for a long, long time. In other words, a person may become aware of heart trouble today, but it didn't start today. It began a long, long time ago. A person may become aware of cancers or tumors today, but that doesn't mean that it happened today. It has been in the body and growing in the body for a long, long time. Therefore, it is safe to say that no one in the human world is entirely healthy. As a matter of fact, no one is, because there is always a process of aging and deterioration going on after the age of 30. So therefore, no human body is completely healthy or free. Now, when the activity of meditation takes place and a contact has been established with our source, a purification of consciousness takes place, which translates itself into a purification of mind, and our thoughts become purer, more spiritual, more hopeful, more gracious, and the body in turn begins to lose its impurities, diseases, if there are any forming there, and afterward, when these physical experiences stop, we find that we are really enjoying health, even though we may never know what it is we were healed of. I went through the experience in my early days of meditation of having physical reactions in the body, but I have learned since that there was a good reason for it, and that there were things there that disappeared and that no longer exist. Now, the other answer is this, that if the meditation is not a true meditation and one is still engaging in mental activities, that it is nothing more nor less than the result of those mental activities, and the safe thing to do will be disregard those physical manifestations and meditate. Never meditate more than 2 or 3 minutes, because, under those circumstances, because if you do, you are just engaging again in mental action, because it would not be possible for you to be really in the spirit and hold it for more than 2 or 3 minutes, or even as much as that, until you are far, far advanced into the art of meditation. I recommend to our students that their meditation periods be never more than 2 or 3 minutes, but rather have them 20 times a day, or 10 or 8. Then, as time goes on, they will discover that the 2 or 3 minutes have become 5 without their knowing it. Rarely should any student meditate more than 5 minutes until they have gone so far on the path that they are really consciously embodied in God. Now, the main reason that I say this is that once the mind becomes active, it is not meditation, it is a mental activity, and there's no use of it. Get back to meditation, even if it is only for 30 seconds. even if you feel no effect from it, and do it 10, 20, 30 times in a day, until you do find yourself settling down into peace. Now, we are going to have a meditation in which we will use words and thoughts through which to enter the meditation, but then the meditation itself will last only a half a minute or a minute. Actually, when I am conducting a meditation for you, I can hold you for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes in it, and as you are advanced, I can hold you for 8 hours. But you cannot do it for yourself until you reach that elevation of consciousness. Would you please give another word or synonym for the word grace? In other words, when you say living by the grace of God, could you substitute presence or activity for grace? Yes, indeed. When you are living by the grace of God, you are living by the activity of the presence of God. In other words, you are fulfilling what the Master said, I of my own self can do nothing, the Father doeth the works. Or He performeth that which is given me to do. Now, when through meditation you reach that place where you have made contact with God, you will find that you will have experiences which prove to you that you had nothing to do with that experience, that is, with inaugurating it, that it took place to you. I can cite this class as an illustration. You see, this class I had nothing to do with at all humanly. Actually, we planned our trip here only to be with the son and daughter-in-law and their new baby. And only because of my friendship with Jack Addington did I say that as long as it's Sunday, I will talk for you as I did before. When he wrote, couldn't you make that 2 or 3 extra days if you're going to be here? I said, well, we are going to be there 2 or 3 extra days, so I will be agreeable to any program that you arrange. And he wrote me that he arranged for Sunday morning, Monday night, Tuesday afternoon, and Wednesday night. And I was agreeable to it. But you understand that it was, first of all, friendship for Jack Addington, secondly, a respect for those of their students who showed their interest in the writings and who came to hear me last year. So that I had nothing to do with this class at all, or any thought about having a class. And then it was that Mrs. Sortel wrote me that she and 20 of her friends and associates and students were coming to these lectures, had never had class with me, and would I give them a special class even if it was only for these 4 days. And again, you see, I had nothing to do with it except to say yes. And I said yes out of respect to the fact that I have known Mrs. Sortel many years, know her interest in the study of the infinite way, and knew that she had been having this tape recording work and students attending it, and therefore it was for their sakes that this class was arranged, not by me, evidently by the grace of God, and we were just the instruments. Then, with no publicity and no advertising and nothing else, you who were not of her group are here and find yourselves here. And so I must say to you with all sincerity then that this class is an act of grace appearing in my experience, for which I made no human preparation or thought or plan. I certainly took no thought that I should have a class, yet here it is. Perhaps someday, when something has come out of this class, of perhaps a radical or dramatic or new nature in your life, you will be able to say, yes, it was a grace of God in my life. I didn't plan it, I didn't think of it, in fact, didn't know there was to be one. And yet I find myself in it, and now I see by the result that it too must have been not human planning, but an act of grace. So then the act of grace is an act of God. It is an activity of God, and that is what brought forth this. Now in the same way, when the Infinite Way work began, the war was just coming to a close, and we had no contact with any foreign countries. No thought that this message would spread outside of the state of California. And yet, a letter comes to the desk one day from the most prominent publishing house in all of England. Can we have permission to publish a British edition of The Infinite Way? Would you not call that an act of grace, an act of God? No human planning, no thinking, no ambition, no desire, no mental work, not even the symptom of a thought that such a thing could happen. And you know, as a result of that happening, every book of The Infinite Way, and I don't remember how many there are now, but every one of them is published in British editions. And out of that came a request from Holland, from Switzerland, from Germany, and now they are being published in all these other editions. Do you not see that as an act of God, as the grace of God, the presence of God? No human planning. So it is then that into our experience comes these things that are for our good, but for which we could never have prayed nor even done mental work, because they were not anything that existed in our human thought or human possibility. Yet here they have come about. Now, you may plan for something that's in your own mind which you think of as a certain good. You may even pray or do mental work for it. But how would you go about doing that for some good which you do not yet even know? And there is another of our great, really, principles and works. Do you not realize that in my entire life I had no thought of ever writing a book? I had no thought ever of writing anything of any nature. Such a thing as being an author, more especially of spiritual works, was completely out of my consciousness. I could never have prayed for it. I could never have done mental work to bring it about, because such a thing never entered my mind. And then one day my secretary said to me, "You have written a book." No. And she handed me the manuscript of The Infinite Way. She said, "Why, this is a book, and it has proved to be a book." But do you not see that I couldn't have prayed for it, because such a thing couldn't have been in the realm of possibilities? And more especially when you arrive at the age of 54 and haven't written a book, you certainly don't think about writing one after that. All right. That then illustrates to you what I mean by the grace of God. Not giving you something that you expect, not giving you something you want necessarily, it may do that, but by bringing into your life treasures, experiences of which you've never even heard or thought or dreamed. Last night I had a friend with me, and returning home she said, "I can't agree with everything Mr. Goldsmith said." Well, of course she can't. How can she? She hasn't lived my life. She hasn't had my experience. So she can only judge what I said from her experience. I feel flattered when someone says, "I agree with everything in your book," because I know that they have lived the same experience I have attained the same level of consciousness, and therefore they can agree with it. I hardly expect anyone else to agree with it, more especially those who have not lived this life. And of course, don't you know that that is the history of all of this world? Do you think that anyone believed that we would go around the world in 80 days? Or 80 hours? Do you think that Jesus' teaching was believed by most of the people in the Hebrew synagogues where he taught this? I'm sure that most of them disagreed. I don't have to tell you, it's been so recent, how everybody in the world disagreed with Christian Science when it was introduced. But I have lived to see and to be present in England when the Church of England issued a report after a 5-year investigation into spiritual healing, and said in the report, "While we do not agree with Christian Science theology, we acknowledge that Christian Science has shown us our obligations in this age." Do you know how the church fought spiritual healing in her day? If they hadn't, there would have been no Christian Science church, because she had no idea of founding one. She merely wanted to give spiritual healing to the churches that were already in existence. She couldn't do it. But the Infinite Way is accomplishing that work. The Infinite Way is giving principles of spiritual healing to the churches of all denominations that will open themselves and accept it, and eventually that will be all churches, and also to many in religious science, mental science, unity, whose nature tends more to this spiritual way of life than to the mental. That won't wipe out the mental. It will leave the mental for those to whom that consciousness is natural, and it will remove the others into the spiritual where that is their work. You hear people say, "God told me to do so and so." When do you know that it is God speaking, not the mind of the individual? You know it the very moment that question doesn't come to your mind. As long as that question is in your mind, you cannot know whether it is God or the individual mind. When that question is no longer in your mind, it is because you have the assurance that it is the Word of God. We have two very interesting experiences that illustrate that. One, on a morning when I was sitting at my desk in Honolulu, and I had never been to Europe to carry this message. All of my traveling in Europe was before the Infinite Way, before even my Christian Science days, when I was in the business world. And so it had been many, many years since I'd been to Europe, and all thought of returning there certainly was not a part of my mind. Well, on this morning, sitting at my desk, the voice said, go to New York, give a class, wait there until the first few days of December, and then go to London. And I'll ask you to believe this, that I immediately wrote to New York to make arrangements for a class. And that class ended on November 30th, that I arranged my passport and ticket without a date and sat there waiting until 3rd or 4th of December, and then the voice said, go tomorrow. And I went. And when I arrived in London, I took a suite at a hotel. I went into my living room, sat down, and said, well, Father, you said go to London, and here I am. I don't know anybody, and I've got nothing to do here. But you said come, and here I am. And I want you to know that every single step followed in natural order. Instructions was explicitly given for each step, so that now our work is established in all of the British dominions, commonwealths, and all of the books published, and a marvelous work taking place over there. In the same way, I began receiving letters from South Africa, and eventually I had letters from about 12 students there. And then one day one of them said, when you're in England sometime, why don't you come to South Africa? Of course, it's only 10,000 miles. Just next door. So you know that I just smiled. But the next week, when I was down at the Air Office arranging my trip for London, I heard myself saying to the salesman, how would it be if I came home by way of South Africa? Oh, he said, you could do that easily. You just go to Cairo and down to South Africa and across to Thailand, India, and up to Hong Kong, China, and Tokyo, and you get home very quickly. And how much would it cost me? Oh, only $1,500. Good, give me a ticket. Well, you know, when I went back and told Emma and some of our students, they looked at me as if I either were crazy or had some inside knowledge of something. How can you go to South Africa just because you have 12 students there? And I didn't know the answer. But when I got to South Africa, I was met by 800 students. We had over 200 in a closed class. 200 in Johannesburg, and the same in Cape Town, more in Durban. There were more copies of my book sold in South Africa than I've ever seen in any country or any city. And South Africa has been a marvelous place ever since for our work. And that is what I mean by living by grace. That is what I mean by hearing the still small voice. And when you hear it, don't for a minute believe that it must be reasonable. Or practical, although it will turn out in the end to be practical. Now, next, if I am he, how is our overaction of heart or deafness accounted for, or any other thing? That we will take up tomorrow in our treatment work. Does reiteration of truth statements mentally ever result in these truths becoming an experience of spirit? If not, what is the step? In Art of Meditation, it speaks of these statements becoming an experience of the heart. Could this be what is meant by the mind being used as a medium of awareness? Yes, definitely. We had that in our first hour, thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Lean not unto thine own understanding, acknowledge him in all thy ways, and he will give thee rest. In proportion as you abide in words of truth and let the words of truth abide in you, they eventually become realizations. In other words, it is as if I were to say to you, supply cannot come to you from any source or any direction, not even from God. As a matter of fact, God itself is supply, and God is omnipresence, right where you are. God does not ever result in supply. God does not send supply or give supply or create supply, for God, being infinite spirit, is all the supply there is in the world. Therefore, when you have God, you have an infinity of supply. You have all there is. Son, thou art ever with me, all that I have is thine. Now, I give this to you as a spiritual principle and as the truth. Then, from this moment on, every time a sense of lack appears to you, of anything, any direction, an unfulfilled need, anytime a need of any kind appears, you must consciously declare within yourself, God is fulfillment. The presence of God is my supply. Or the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Stop right there. The Lord is my supply. That's why I cannot want. Is. God is omnipresence. God is fulfillment. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom from lack, limitation, so forth, injustice, inequality. God is, and therefore I am. And as you hold to that, even if in the next day or two or three nothing seems to have changed in your life, you hold fast to this principle. And in a moment that you think that, the bridegroom will be there, the Christ, fulfilling itself as supply. Then you'll discover why God does not give supply or send supply. God, being infinite, is supply. But you, by acknowledging this, by keeping this word of truth alive in your consciousness, you have, through your mind and the activity of your mind, broken past your mind into your soul faculties. And now you spiritually discern that this is the truth. At first, it is an intellectual agreement. At first, this consciously keeping the mind stayed on God and acknowledging God is an activity of the mind. But remember, it is not an activity of the mind that is aimed at creating supply or bringing you supply. It is an activity of the mind reminding you of omnipresence. Remember that whereas you may have used mental work to create supply or companionship or harmony, in our work you will not do this. The activity of truth in your consciousness will not be for the purpose of getting supply or getting anything else. It will be for the purpose of acknowledging omnipresence, acknowledging that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, acknowledging that where I am, God is, for we are one, and in the presence of God there is no lack. Some say there is no physical body, only spiritual body. What then is this body which we now use? It is true that if God is spirit, that there can't be a material body. But you must remember that all there is to humanhood is material sense. Once you have no material sense, you're no longer living as a human being. Therefore, even though this body is your spiritual body, you are, and we all are entertaining a physical, finite, material sense of body. And it is for this reason that we continue to call this our physical body or material body when it really isn't. It is a spiritual body about which we entertain a material concept. Now, it is the same with everything else. It is only because of our teaching that we believe that this is supply, that money is supply. Everyone accepts that. And of course, the moment they need something, they first think that they must have this, and then they can get that. You have to break that in the infinite way. You have to break that. This isn't supply. This is a symbol of supply, and it appears in our experience in proportion as we have supply. That means in proportion as we have the conscious realization of God. That realization of God appears externally as money or transportation or lands or investments or home, companionship. So it is that we have a concept of silver and gold and bills being supply, but we have to overcome that, because money isn't supply, God is supply. And when you have attained the realization of the presence of God, you have access to all the supply, all of the money that you can ever possibly need for any righteous purpose. So in our work, we are not healers of the body, because the body is spiritual. But we are revelators of the spiritual nature of God and man. This revelation changes our consciousness, and we lose our material concept of the universe in some measure, and then we have a less material sense of body, and eventually it comes to where you use this body like you do your automobile. You just jump into it to get around in, and you jump out of it when you want to. Remember, the Master said, I can pick up this body or lay it down, and so can anybody who has attained spiritual consciousness, because we do not live in a body. We are consciousness, and the body is within our consciousness, and that is why it is subject unto us. And that is why this body must obey us. This hand cannot steal, only because my consciousness governs it, and there is no theft in my consciousness. And so it is, eventually you will see that the body cannot become sick, because it is embodied in your consciousness, and when you have the consciousness of God as health, the body then can only show forth that which it is, the temple of the living God. And that comes to us by degrees. That comes to us gradually, that we become aware of the fact that we are not reacting as much. Let me give you an illustration of that, since you are all metaphysicians. Have you not noticed that regardless of what the weather is or how many epidemics fly around, that fewer metaphysicians respond to those ills? Have you not noticed that there are less empty seats in a metaphysical church than an Orthodox church in this bad weather or epidemic season? Have you not noticed that the children of metaphysical families have far less absences from school because of illness than the non-metaphysical families' children? I can give you figures on it. Now, as you evolve spiritually, you become a law unto your body, unto your home, unto your health, unto your children. I have even taught school teachers so that they do not have absences from school for sickness, or at least they've reduced them tremendously, and they do not have students left back at the end of the term for not passing, because there are no such in their class. Why? Your consciousness, once you have attained contact with God, is the law of harmony. This is the secret of healing work. When you take yourself to a practitioner, you are stepping aside and saying to the practitioner, you take control of my health and my body. And it is your consciousness that must restore harmony to my body. If you can make that surrender, and if it is a practitioner or teacher who knows this, they will restore your health, your vitality, your youth. Why? Because consciousness is the law. But consciousness doesn't hang around up here. Consciousness becomes Jesus, John, Paul. Consciousness becomes Mrs. Eddy or Mrs. Fillmore. Consciousness becomes the teacher, the practitioner, and their consciousness becomes the law to your health and to your supply. That's why it's wise to have a spiritual practitioner or teacher, because they have no personal powers of good or evil. It is the Spirit of God which worketh in them and through them to become the law of harmony unto your experience. If we are on the spiritual path and do not see death, what will the others not on the spiritual path see? They will see what they have always seen, a human life. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes healthy, sometimes sick. It will be the same human life that they left here. In other words, the transition does not in and of itself change a person's consciousness. As on the level of consciousness they leave here, that is the level of consciousness in which they find themselves there. The only exception to that is that those on the spiritual path, more especially if they have made their God contact, often bridge over at least 1,000 years of development in 1 hour. In other words, by the very act of passing from this physical sense, they are released into the measure of spiritual consciousness they have attained. And that may carry them forward 1,000 years from where they are now. But those who leave this plane purely human can only awaken purely human. But they have the same opportunity to begin their spiritual life as if they were still on this plane. In other words, everyone on this plane can start their spiritual life whenever they are ready. Whether they started at birth or whether they started at 80 years of age, they can start at any time. But if they pass on, they still have that same opportunity. But the passing on does not spiritualize them. On the other hand, I have witnessed that those who leave this plane far along in spiritual consciousness bridge over the entire span of the future and fulfill what the Orientals teach, that you reach samadhi, or the eternal divine state of consciousness, without any necessity of returning to physical sense. All others must still go through phases of physical sense until they have outgrown them by means of spiritual development. But any progress spiritward on this plane means that much further progress on the next. And I want to tell you that that accounts for Buddha, Jesus Christ, John, Paul, hundreds of others whom I will not name in order to come up to the present and bring you to Mrs. Eddy, Mrs. Fillmore, Mr. Holmes, and countless others whom you may know, whom I do not personally know. That accounts for these who have become spiritual leaders, not because of anything they learned since they were born, but because of the spiritual awareness they had developed when they came here. Never believe for a moment that anyone goes from being an actual human being, unenlightened, unillumined, to becoming a very serious spiritual light. It can't happen. For spiritual illumination comes slowly. You die daily in order to be reborn of the Spirit. And therefore, it is those who have been on the spiritual path, perhaps for centuries, who come onto this plane of existence and become the dozen or 2 dozen who become the spiritual lights of this age. And then remember that there will be others 100 years and 200 and 300 years from now who are developing now, who will come to be the spiritual light then. Yes. Are we through that? Well, it'll only take a few minutes to finish this. Please, will you talk a little about the scrolls discovered in the Kwamang caves? Actually, I will discuss it very briefly, because discussion will do nothing more than to tell you this: they are authentic. They are the actual manuscripts which were written between 400 BC and on up into 200 AD. And they describe the life and times of that particular sect, the Essenes, and with some of the others that are being translated, they go into the life and times of those who were not a part of that sect. They are authentic, and they do verify the fact of Hebrew history. And to what extent they will compel changes in Orthodox religious teachings remains to be seen. As you know, there is already a very large movement in the Protestant Church to make it no longer compulsory for a minister to believe in the Immaculate Conception and birth. That is one of the changes that is bringing about. It will naturally be of long duration. It will take a century for those changes to be made, because who would want to go before their congregation and say we were wrong? So the changes will be made without anyone knowing or realizing that they were wrong. And it will appear just like this teaching of prayer. The day will come when no one will any longer pray for things, and no one will say we were wrong. It will be as if this had always existed. And so it is. All of these changes will come about gradually.